So thank you, comrades, for coming. I'm not going to spend too long talking. We'll have some opportunity for discussion, debate, any questions, and we'll come to an understanding on the role of the Labour Party and social democracy in the British left. And really, this is a question that has plagued the British left for over a century. The Labour Party was founded in the roots of the trade union movement, but it very clearly and quickly became another party of the ruling class. Its roles in early governments showed it wanted to prove itself and would prove itself capable of ruling British capitalism, of managing British capitalism, rather than representing the workers and unions it claimed to represent. So the role that the Labour Party has played for the past 100 years in Britain is a role of deceiving workers into supporting a bourgeois imperialist party that will not change life in Britain for the workers for the better. Now, there are lots of people that argue that Labour has changed life for workers for the better over the past century. And this has been part of the Keynesian consensus since World War II, where what the Labour Party has done is take some of the super profits from the British Empire, and the British Empire has never really gone away, it's just changed form. British imperialism, what we refer to today, is not just the ships of the Royal Navy or the British Army going to loot Africa, Asia, the Americas. British imperialism today is now the banks and the financial institutions that siphon wealth from the rest of the world, that own mines across Africa, sweatshops in Asia, and more across the world. And they use the profits from these countries, from these super exploited workers, they use these profits and the remains of the empire in order to pay off workers in this country. And we got social housing, the NHS, etc., not because the Labour Party were kind and doing the right thing, but because the Labour Party were there to mediate between the working class and the ruling class. They were there to stave off what the ruling class were really afraid of. They were afraid of a revolution. They were afraid of workers seizing power. It was even in the Labour Party Constitution, Clause 4, which famously was gotten rid of in 1997. And I'll be taking any bets for anyone that wants to bet that Keir Starmer is going to reintroduce Clause 4, that said that they wanted to transfer the ownership of the means of production from the working class, from the ruling class to the working class. Now, this was in the Labour Party Constitution for almost 100 years, for the entirety of the 20th century. At what point was this clause ever endorsed, was ever properly used? The only times we had nationalisation were after World War II, which was forced upon the ruling class in order to save British industry, because it was so thoroughly devastated by that point. It needed nationalisation, it needed central planning in order to restore British industry. Likewise, the social welfare state was brought to stave off revolution in this country, which was fermenting after World War I, and especially after World War II. British workers looked to socialism. They looked to the vibrant trade union movement, the vibrant socialist movement in this country. They looked to the Soviet Union and other countries where revolutions were taking place, and saw that those people, working people in those countries, had a dignified, better standard of life than workers in this country. What is today the sixth nation in the world, and was at the time the most powerful, richest country in the world, had worse living conditions for its workers than the Soviet Union, which was a backward agrarian country at the start of the 20th century and developed to become a superpower, quickly overtaking the conditions of the British working class. So the Labour Party, we know, has sought to manage the British working class, to deceive them into voting for the Labour Party and not having a revolution, but has sought to manage the empire as well. So hand in hand with developing the social welfare state, some pittance from the British Empire to the British workers to stop them from revolting, hand in hand with that, they were actively managing the empire. And what does that mean? That means they were invading Korea along with the United States. That means they were managing the Malayan emergency, which was not called a war, because then insurance companies, British insurance companies, would have had to pay out money to cover the losses from what would be a war. So they managed the Malayan emergency, which saw them beheading communists in the jungle, which saw them implementing concentration camps. Britain was implementing concentration camps well after we defeated Nazi Germany and condemned them for using them.
Have you ever been into a concentration camp? Have you ever been inside one?
I have not.
I am a British soldier. I fought against them and I've been into Belsen, right? And my father-in-law is German, I'm one of German girls. His old family were wiped out in Auschwitz, right?
Yeah.
That's your people's party, right? And the real German people, they pulled them out on the street at night, in the night towns and vessel towns. The Nazis say they were hiding people, right? And then there was a Russian Putin, right? I tell you, he was a criminal when out in Germany. And if the KGB got you, right, we had it like socks with scars. You used to park outside our barracks, right, and take all your photographs, right? If they got hold of you, they never got back unless you had a transfer with your ticket. And you were sent to something called the Gulag, right? So if the Russians, in the next 10 years, we got us, it's going to happen 3 times when I was in Germany, right? Good. If they will come again, they will speak to German, because they beat the Russians.
So I think we're all proud of the defeat of Nazi Germany, which was spearheaded by the Soviet Union as they liberated the concentration camps, as we helped the Arctic convoys.
First regiment in Belsen, right?
That's one of many.
We haven't looked, we know all about it.
Thank you for your service in World War II. Just like to know, I'm very proud of my grandparents for fighting the Nazis as well. But I don't know the reasons they were fighting the Nazis. I suspect it's because they were defending the British Empire, which was committing crimes just as great as Nazi Germany over a longer period of time. The British invented concentration camps in South Africa and they continued using them for a long time. And that is what the Labour Party inherited, that's what the Labour Party are happy to manage. And there's a reason that the Labour Party will never be able to be pressured to change the things for the better in Britain. They might make small changes, they might make tweaks, but the reality is the economic situation in Britain and the world is getting more intense in terms of economic crisis. And in every economic crisis, they put more pressure on the workers. They take more wealth from the workers, and it gets to the richest in the country and in the world. It happened in 2022, during the financial crisis, during coronavirus, during the lockdowns. There was a massive transfer of wealth from the poorest to the richest. And this happens in every economic crisis. And Labour cannot reverse economic laws. Labour are only seeking to manage capitalism. Labour are seeking to manage the decline of Britain. They're seeking to manage the decline of British imperialism. And they represent the dwindling Labour aristocracy. Now, the reason Labour have been able to fool the working class for so long into supporting them, into voting for them, is from the privileged workers. The privileged workers that have the boss's job, or a privileged position in the union, or anywhere else. This Labour aristocracy is paid off. They get better pay, they get better conditions, they get more holidays. They're not the ones slaving away day in, day out, doing 12-hour shifts. They're not the ones that are finding it harder and harder to live every day. These are the people that are being paid just enough to have a nice, comfortable life under capitalism. And what they do in return from that is convince workers that there's nothing they can do, that we can only witness the decline of our own pay and conditions, witness the decline of our country. And this is the split in the labour movement that we need to recognise and understand in Britain today. And this is what we need to reconcile with. And it's represented by the Labour Party in the main part, but by Social Democrats throughout the Labour movement. And they'll try and convince you that the Labour Party is the only place where we can fight, it's the only thing that matters. Despite only 18% of the voting population voting for Labour, despite almost less than half of people voting, despite a tiny membership of the Labour Party. They're trying to convince people this is the most important arena for working class politics. It's not. The most important arena for working class politics is amongst the broader working class. It's amongst bringing people out of the illusion of the Labour Party. It's about bringing people out of the illusion of voting for social democracy, voting for change. Now, voting can be a tool or a method or tactic, but it's not the end-all and be-all of working class politics. And that's what we need to build in our party, in the Communist Party, as an alternative to the narrow-minded electoral opportunism of parties like the Labour Party and those who would encourage you to support them. And I'd like to open it to the floor for any questions and comments. Thank you, comrades.
Well, thank you, Dan. While you're all thinking about the things you would like to add, I would like to add a small point as well. I was thinking about when Dan was talking, this question of Labour and the Labour aristocracy. So the Labour Party, we've learned from studying Lenin, I'm looking around the room, I see people who study Lenin. We've learned about how the Labour Party was always founded on, has its roots in, and represents the interests of the Labour aristocracy. And it was during World War I that Lenin really identified what is the Labour aristocracy. He showed us the political and economic roots of that. He showed us how imperialism bribes a small upper section of the working class and creates this layer, this privileged layer, whose privileges are entirely based in the continued existence of the imperialist system. And that explains their total civility to the imperialist ruling class and their total loyalty to the imperialist system, despite the fact that they use a lot of working class phrases to dress up their policies and their politics. But there's something interesting, I think, that we've seen and we should be aware of when it comes to the Labour aristocracy over the course of the last 100 years. And that is, after World War II, there was a massive expansion of the Labour aristocracy. It came to represent a much larger proportion of the working class because part of creating the welfare state, part of giving access to healthcare and education and the courts to ordinary people and all kinds of social services, part of all of that meant that you needed a massive expansion in the numbers of professionals who deliver those services. Now, those professionals were educated in the state education system by the grammar schools or the comprehensive schools and the expansion of the universities from the ranks of the working class. And they massively fueled this big expansion in the Labour aristocracy to deliver the welfare state benefits to ordinary working people, which came after World War II. What we're seeing now, and during that period, of course, even the mass of the poor working class had their existences lifted up. In many respects, you could say almost everybody became a Labour aristocrat in some shape or form, in the sense that everybody was getting a bit of a bribe from the empire, which was different to the situation before World War II, before the welfare state. And it's what gave us the illusion, because Labour was in power when all these things were delivered to the working class, gave us the illusion that, oh, Labour really wants to deliver socialist measures. Labour really wants to do pro-working class things. It has a platform and a programme which is for the working class, for making our lives better. Because, of course, a mass of British workers, their lives did get better. Materially, obviously, noticeably better after World War II. What we're seeing now, as the welfare state is being unpicked and public services are being got rid of, what we're seeing is not only a return to the pre-World War II situation of a small layer of Labour aristocrats who have very obviously more privilege than the mass of workers, and a steady sinking down of the conditions of most workers into, real penury, poverty. 1/3 of British children are going to school hungry right now. This is shocking to somebody of my age, where that sort of thing simply was hardly ever seen. Right? And now it's absolutely rife. Poverty, hunger, fuel poverty, these things are becoming absolutely rife in our society as the mass of poor workers get pushed down, and their pay and conditions become ever more precarious and below poverty level. But what we're also seeing is a shrinking back in the size of the Labour aristocracy. So it's becoming once again very sharply differentiated, the difference between the mass of poor workers and the Labour aristocracy. And as that process happens, it becomes more and more obvious who the Labour Party serves, because it's the obviously privileged section of the working class. What, you know, the Guardian reading liberals are the ones now who identify with the Labour Party in a way that the mass of the working class has actually stopped identifying with the Labour Party. And Dan pointed out a couple of really important statistics from the most recent election, which is we know that it was a historically low turnout. In fact, there was only once since the 19th century, or since World War I, where it's been that low, and that was during it was the last Tony Blair election, I think. It was also very low. But not only was it under 60%, and in some constituencies like 40%, which is a real indictment, a real illustration of a lack of engagement of ordinary people with the whole process, but our official electorate now is missing 5 million people. So 5 million adults in Britain are not even on the electoral roll. And if you take those adults into account, as Dan said, the number of British adults who voted for the Labour Party is 18%. And with that 18% of the adult population, they could achieve a landslide in terms of parliamentary seats, which is a total indictment of our democracy, isn't it? But that understanding is actually spreading very fast amongst ordinary poor working class people. They've given up their faith in the Labour Party a long time ago. That's exactly why so many of them don't bother turning out to vote. They've realised having a Labour MP, having a Labour council didn't save our industries, didn't save our services, haven't saved our schools, hasn't saved our libraries, hasn't saved a job or a library book, never mind a factory or a library, right? In areas where they've had Labour Party MPs and Labour Party councils for decades and voted loyally Labour every single election time, and it did absolutely nothing for them. Whether Labour were in opposition or in government made no difference. So people have overwhelmingly been learning that lesson, and that's exactly what's being expressed in the appalling turnout figures in our elections, and then in the declining numbers of people who even bother to register on the electoral rolls. And I think really it's very important for us to try to help people who what you often find is mass of people have realised this, right? And it makes them not apathetic, but indifferent to the process of bourgeois elections. And they're right. But what they haven't done is moved on from that to say, right, then what do I have to do to bring about change then? Okay, elections aren't going to change something. What is going to change things then? So we have two battles to fight, really. One is to reach those people and get them engaged in the idea that they have power, and how do they learn to organise and use it, and what does change actually look like? On the other hand, there's also this pattern that often happens, which is when people do start to wake up and start to get active and want to be active, they're caught by the net of social democrats channeling them back towards the Labour Party that instinctively they've all been turning away from. Most likely thing that happens to someone who starts to get politically active is they're pulled into an organisation that's directly or indirectly connected to Labour Party and the social democracy, keeps them busy, channels their energy into this machinery of going nowhere, of loyalty to the present system, instead of actually helping them to work out how they can use their energy to change it completely.
Thanks, Kirsty. I think before we bring anyone else in, I just wanted to make a couple of points about the recent elections and Keir Starmer as well. I think the time when anyone can really convincingly tell people to support the Labour Party is long gone. We see the promises that Keir Starmer's been making in the run-up to the election and after the election. They weren't for us, they weren't for workers, they were for businesses, they were for the imperialists. His promises were to be business friendly, to control migration and immigration, and to make sure that our commitments to NATO and invading other countries were going to be kept up. These are not policies in the interest of the British working class, these are interests of Keir Starmer's masters. And we can see during the recent election as well the small surge in independent MPs and in Workers' Party candidates standing. And in a lot of cases, a lot of those elections looked very dodgy. A lot of candidates losing by very small amounts. In boroughs controlled very tightly by the Labour Party, who do all the counting. who control the Labour councils and have done for decades, the same Labour councils that have been selling off all the public services and provisions, profiting massively off of them, and not bringing them back to the normal people. So there's this problem with social democracy where we're telling people, not us, but leftists in general, we're telling people that, well, we can't hope to do anything except vote for change. And then they see that voting for change doesn't do anything because they're telling them to vote for the same party that's been cutting services and going to war for generations. And so workers feel helpless and lost. And we need to inspire new confidence in the working class, that they can organise in their workplaces, they can organise in their communities, they can organise not as a party that is their enemy, not part of the Labour Party or other social democratic groups, but as part of a class-conscious organisation that represents their interests. And that's the most important thing for us to be doing today. Thank you.
Anybody like to add anything? Or we will just wrap up and say that will do for our 1:30 meeting.
Well, there's a couple of young lads around the corner. I don't know if they wanted to say anything. I think they're gone.
Come on then, Tim. No, we need you on the mic.
Yeah, I think it's long past time now where the workers should have been disabused of their hopes in the Labour Party. You know, they've been betrayed, you know, for a long time, and there was a time at least where it was said the Labour Party, the workers should support the Labour Party because they had not had their experience of a Labour Party in power. They had to come to see through this example that a Labour Party in power would come to betray their hopes and their aspirations. It's long time that they should have been disabused now of these hopes and to abandon the Labour Party. Unfortunately, we've got Trotskyists, we've got revisionists, we've got oppositionists, you know, who continue to inculcate this hope in the British imperialist Labour Party. The founders of scientific socialism, Marx and Engels, had noticed long before us how British imperialism had helped to create a bourgeoisified working class. Marx and Engels, in corresponding with Marx, had shown how Britain, the first imperialist on the world stage, the first major bourgeoisie, had managed to create, alongside the bourgeoisie, a bourgeois aristocracy and a bourgeois labour party, a bourgeois working class. You know, those super profits that Britain used to buy off a labour aristocracy, much of those super profits now have dwindled. This labour aristocracy is becoming more and more precarious itself, and it has been pushed down into the ranks of the working class. You know, but all I can say is on a footnote to leave it on this: no support for the Labour Party, no hopes in the Labour Party. Thank you.
This is called We Can't Vote It In. The establishment makes a din and tells us to vote the change in. It would be fine if change this way could happen, but most MPs, the people would slap them. Voting doesn't work, my friends, not when the ruling parties meet the establishment ends. Labour or Tory, both of these tell the same story. They, all of those in Parliament, do all they can to prevent change, which isn't all that strange when you consider what their function really is. All they are for is to prop up the bourgeoisie, to peel back the layers to really see. They are not there for you, whether red or blue. The changes we seek won't happen next week. They need to be built for and strived for, fought for. We can't be caught out. Voting doesn't work, I have no doubt.
Thank you, Helen. Lovely.